Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now,
all right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Hunting Beast Report. It's another Tuesday night, another show. Dan, how are we doing tonight?
Good. How you doing?
Great. I'm doing great. I'm glad to hear you're doing good instead of just living.
I'm alive.
You're alive.
Is that what you're waiting for?
What's that?
Is that what you were waiting for?
Yes. I was hoping for a different response here tonight. So this is episode 80 tonight, and this is also our lucky number 13th episode together here. And just want to say a thanks to all you beasts out there. You've been very welcoming and having me be the host here. I've actually received quite a few really nice messages from a number of you reaching out and telling me to keep up the good work, and I appreciate that. You never know how you're going to fit in, and Dan's got a large following, and you guys are diehards with Dan, and I appreciate you allowing me into your lives here on these Tuesday nights, so very much appreciated. With that said, we are continuing with this series, the top 5 that we've done with Todd and Aaron and Andy May, and tonight we're bringing on Mr. James Squires. How are we tonight, James?
Doing excellent. Thanks for having me.
Good. We're really happy to have you joining us here tonight. And I know a lot of the followers are too. You've been a big part of the Hunting Beast over the years. And that's probably something that Dan can go ahead and probably talk about even better than I can. So,
yeah, James has been on the Beast since it started, I believe, right? You came over from Blood Brothers, I think, right?
Yeah, I think basically when Blood Bro kind of started is when I kind of met you guys, and we had a pretty small little club over there when that started off, and then jumped over to the Beast when that happened. Yeah,
Awesome.
not as I was saying to Scott before we started, I'm not as socially active with social media and videos and stuff as I used to be, but I stay kind of tuned into it all, and really appreciate being invited on to talk about kind of the journey, because kind of being there early on with the Beast and all that, I've seen a lot of change over the years for sure.
Yeah, some good, some bad, but a lot of change.
Some good, some bad. You got it.
All right. Well, as you guys have been seeing here the last couple of weeks, these shows have been running pretty long here, getting into great detail on some of the tactics and thought process that went into some of these hunts here. So I don't want to drone on about anything else here. I'd like us just to go ahead and get right into it, if you're good with that, James.
Yeah.
And let's bring up that first buck here.
All right. Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying I think the same thing everyone else has already said, which is picking 5 bucks is incredibly hard. And I think Andy said the same thing. These are not going to be necessarily my biggest. I think one is, but they're special hunts, and kind of wanted to call them out more for tactical reasons and things I learned from these hunts, probably more than just size of the buck. So starting out with this guy, I mean, you can see right away, and I don't know, Dan, you remember this guy probably. I'm going to kind of try to pull you in on the story on this one because you were part of it. But, he's a 120s buck. I kind of estimated him as a 3-year-old at the time. So he wasn't anything by, mega scoring standards for sure. But it was a really important buck to me in my journey, specifically learning to hunt marshes. And this is one that, I think when I discovered Blood Bro and Dan specifically, the real novel thing, and I know this is kind of out there now and it doesn't maybe seem as novel, but hunting beds specifically in the marsh was not a thing. there really wasn't anyone talking about that. That was a specific Dan info thing. I just remember discovering that. And it was really hard to kind of learn how to do it, how to be aggressive, how much was aggressive enough. And I learned a lot kind of over 2 years when I killed this buck, which I'll kind of get into here. But Dan was a big part of this one because we would have some phone calls about strategy on this thing, and I was learning the ropes back then on this for sure. So this is a really big cattail marsh. Minnesota, very similar to a lot of southern Wisconsin stuff. I grew up in southern Wisconsin.
James, I'm gonna real quick. You're sounding a little far away all of a sudden. I don't know if you positioned yourself different, but
No, how does it sound now?
yeah, that sounds better.
All right, I'll try to keep the same tone. Hopefully, everything's working out.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I know we had some issues last week's show, and that was tough for people to hear. So we want to make sure you come in loud and clear.
For sure. Yep. Just interrupt me if it sounds any worse.
Okay. No, sounds good right now.
All right. Yeah. So big marsh. This is a really, really big tract of land. So it took a lot of kind of intelligence to even figure out how do you pinpoint a buck, let alone kind of bedding and that sort of thing. And, again, this is all stuff that I think the information is out there a lot more well known now. So just kind of trying to draw up like the context that there just wasn't the information. I was kind of soaking it up, like guys like John Eberhart, his books at the time, Greg Miller with some hill country stuff I was doing. But really when I landed on, at the time, the old Blood Bro forum and Dan specifically, this was a new thing. So I was trying to figure it out, and I put in so much time in this particular area. Back then, I don't do it as much now, and Dan, I don't even hear you talk about it necessarily as much now, but kind of late night driving and shining, like during the times it was legal, was a really big part of how we gathered intelligence back then about what bucks were in the area. Cameras really were not that great. This particular tract of land wasn't even legal to run cameras on, but they weren't great back then, even if you could. So it wasn't really part of the arsenal in getting intelligence. And this buck specifically, I kind of got onto just driving some surrounding private parcels and seeing him kind of at dusk in late summer in some bean fields. And he is kind of distinctively wide and low from a rack. So I kind of was able to track him on that same, that same kind of characteristic. And I spent a lot of time. I think that summer I spent more time really than ever kind of just putting miles on in the car with binoculars. And in Minnesota, I think it's still the case today. I don't hunt there as much these days, but I think you get 2 hours after sunset for shining. So sometimes these marsh bucks aren't even making it back to those fields in that window. So shining was kind of like, would find him sometimes, but it was interesting that sometimes he'd be out there up in these bean fields before, well before dark. So, and I remember one particular night on this guy, and this was kind of like one of those key moments in kind of preseason scouting. I actually saw him in kind of a wet lowland little marsh spot right off the road, kind of adjacent to an area that I'm hunting. And I was kind of starting to piece together, okay, I think I have an idea where he might be going. And this is fairly open country, like it's oak islands and then big breaks of cattails and just kind of corridor travelway for these bucks before they get into ag. So it's kind of nothing for him to go 2 miles and make that round trip to the bean fields and then get back into those beds. And that was something that I think kind of blew me away at the time, kind of learning that and developing it, is how much sort of good little patches of oaks and stuff I'd walk through on my way back to this bedding area, kind of thinking, gosh, that looked good. I should sit this island and work my way back to the furthest back spot I should get to. But I think over the years, the pressure of other hunters to those easier to get to islands, these older bucks have just instinctually gotten back to those little tucked in corners, the little tricky spots that are kind of harder to get back into. And that was the case with this buck. And one of the things that I talked to Dan about on this thing, because gosh, I was really uncomfortable back then getting aggressive. All my buddies, everyone, it was farmland, hunting, sit similar stands multiple times. You don't want to bust a buck out of their bed. So I remember talking to you, Dan, at the time about like, I can get on this one oak island and I can kind of see over to where their bedroom is. And I think this, based on my winter scouting, I found a lot of beds, 200 yards just across this little, there was kind of a break where there was some open water. And then there was some other kind of higher land behind that. And I remember you kind of coaching me into that back then of just that line of like pushing it even further. Because I think the year before I hunted that first little island and I had some encounters where I saw some better bucks in that season further out. And when you're hunting that big open cattail country, that happens sometimes where you get a glimpse of them and you're just not in the game. You're not far enough in. So in the case of this buck, so I kind of had him pegged. I had a really good idea where he was. Of course, you never know for sure if they're going to be around, but I had my most confidence ever going into that season on this particular buck, and I got to the point. So I kind of knew the trees that I wanted to get into, and I still question if this was key or not. I think it was, but I basically got to the last 100 yards on this buck, and I needed to get into. There was a little row of, probably barely bigger than your thigh. I mean, maybe 10-inch diameter swamp white oaks, and that's pretty much what was all in this area is these swamp white oaks, and they'll do an acorn drop right around that opening weekend, mid-September. And those bucks are kind of either in those little tiny clumps or they're not, depending on that acorn year. And, I had not been in here at all. This is a first hunt situation. Stand is on my back. And I don't know if it just killed me. I got in super early. I'm talking 1 o'clock in the afternoon on opening day, which, you're usually sitting till like 7:38. And I belly crawled on my belly the last 100 yards to get to that base of that tree. I was so paranoid, having talked through this hunt with Dan at the time, that if this deer could see, because they were kind of in elevated, it doesn't look like there's elevation in this marsh country, but it's so surprising when you stand in their beds and you kind of look backwards at your approach, how much elevation there actually can be, and it doesn't show up good
Sure.
on Onyx and hybrid, the hybrid topos. Sometimes you look at, you don't see that same elevation, but it's definitely there. So I was really paranoid on this guy about, having him see me. So I belly crawled right to the base of that tree. Took forever getting everything set up, and it was kind of a crazy hunt as far as that it came together with this guy. Then. So the way this, I wish I had something to draw here. I should have drawn a little picture, but you're kind of going around that little like opening where there's open water that I described, okay? And I'm on just a very tiny little thin strip of kind of higher ground where these swamp white oaks are. And the wind that day was pretty good. I wouldn't maybe characterize it as marginal. We always talk about kind of liking to hunt marginal wind, which I am a big fan of. But it was pretty decent this day. It was wasn't a lot of wind, but I was getting sucked down to that cooler water, kind of right to my north. And I felt like things were pretty good. I got set up clean. I didn't hear anything blow out of there. But a doe got up early on this particular hunt, and she went straight to that open water and wanted to get a drink. And she got pretty much downwind from me and started getting my wind. And I thought, the jig is up.
Yeah.
She is going to blow, and this is going to be the end of this perfectly planned hunt on this guy. And she definitely got nervous, and I got off clean with her. She kind of moseyed on out, didn't like it, but she didn't blow, which was pretty key. And this guy, he was he was there, and he was kind of out in some canary grass where I didn't exactly expect him. So the bedding that I had pegged was kind of under, I don't know what kind of bush it was, but it was kind of like a red willow, I would call it almost. And that's where I'd found a lot of bedding just around that, where I couldn't quite see into it from my tree stand, but I could see the spot and it wasn't far. But this particular day, he was bedded in some canary grass, kind of out in the open, and he popped up, moseyed on over my way, and just perfect executed shot on this one. And I'll probably get into some crazy stories on executing the shot and getting that done with a couple of my others, but hit him. I think I missed ribs. I always have a theory bucks don't run far if your arrow goes in and exits without catching a rib. I think oftentimes they don't know what happened, and that was the case with this guy. Made a perfect double lunger, kind of took one big bound and looked around like, what the heck just happened, and got dizzy and tipped over. But it was one of my proudest, if not the proudest kills, even though again it wasn't a giant monster, but the kind of work preparation and tactics that I had to take to, locate him, get it all to come together. I think that's that moment that guys that are just getting into this, you're looking for like that confidence boost. Like
Sure.
how do I get that confidence that I'm putting the pieces all together right and this is going to work out? And I think it was 2 years of hunting Marsh was really hard up to this point to kind of get that. I was clocking a lot of hunts and never really thought like it was kind of coming together. I killed like a 2-year-old, kind of a similar hunt, but not kind of the traditional tactics that we hear Dan talk about these days that, again, are really much more well known. But getting kind of down to that, like pushing the limit. And when he got out of his bed, I would estimate him at under 70 yards for sure. I mean, he was kind of on top of me like that. From when I saw him stand up to when he got in for a shot, it was very close. And I definitely got buck fever on him trying to hold it together. I'm always a little torn on what do you like better? Do you like when a buck is on top of you with no prep time, or do you want to watch him forever? And I kind of had it in between on this guy. I got to watch him stand up, feed a little bit, and start moseying my way. And I don't like watching him a ton. That one was almost too long. You get that much time watching him coming in. I like a little time to prep, but not. Maybe that one was on a little bit of the too much of the long way. But I don't know, Dan. Do you remember talking about this guy? Do you
Oh yeah,
remember
oh yeah.
that? It was like close to 20 years ago now.
Yeah, when I look at that buck, it kind of looks to me like I don't know if everybody's going to get it, but I understand why you picked that buck, because that buck has to have a lot of meaning to you. Because when you first come on to like hunting marsh islands and stuff like that, and I see it a lot with guys, there's just like not trust. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but there's this little bit of doubt that this can really work. Is this, can I really go in there and do this whole new method and have this work, and find his beds and figure out how he's going to come through here and not blow him out? And you have to have that confidence. You have to have it work. And that was the pivotal moment where it worked for you and just changed the whole way you hunted from then on. Am I reading that right?
Oh, 100%. And it applied to, and I think you hit on this last week actually with Andy too. It actually applies way more to everything else, like hunting hill country and beds there. It's really no different. I still apply, and I'll get into that with some of these other hunts, but I apply all the exact same learning and tactics. I'm hunting just as aggressively, kind of going through all the motions. I may not belly crawl to my tree. I still kind of chuckle about that. I think that might have been one of those. I may have gone too far. I don't know, but who cares? It
Right.
it came together. Yeah.
James, if we could just go back with that belly crawl there, and when you're talking about the elevation for the buck bedding area, if you could maybe estimate what are we talking about? What was it, just more humped up there, or can you
Yeah.
kind of gauge that a little bit?
Yeah. So again, I think it comes down to you have to, and on this particular buck in this bedding area, I spent a decent amount of time in there in December scouting, December and January kind of scouting. And I like to, if I can, stand in their beds and just spend a little time and try to observe. And that sounds simple, but to have that mindfulness to like kind of sit there and think, okay, what does it look like coming the other way? What is kind of the topography? What can I see? And like I said, it was surprising how how much more elevated in that canary grass where he was and kind of that bedding. And that bush wasn't far from where he was bedded. I was just surprised he was kind of in the open in that canary grass, but I think that grass can kind of be cool, which is why he was probably laying there. And he might have moved late morning or something, maybe he moved a little bit. I don't think they always lay just exactly in the bed that you found, but he was within, call it 30 yards of what I had scouted. And I was just paranoid as all get out. Now I think having put more hunts like that in, and maybe too much, like that's maybe an edge you lose when you get a little too confident, is now I would probably, if I were to hunt in that same spot and same situation, I'd probably just scoot up to my tree quicker and be more confident. It's more about the
Yeah.
noise. If he's bedded down, he's probably not looking through that canary grass. But back then, I felt like it was essential. And I think some years too, that grass in those marshes, some years it's like chest high, and then other years, in a drier year, it's very short. So that really factors into line of sight too, just how much they can kind of see up out of those beds. And cattails are kind of similar too. They can be higher and lower in different wet and dry years, which kind of impacts my thought process on some of that. But I always like to think about that line of sight, like how can they see you coming or going? Because I
Right.
think that you never even know then if that's what did it to you before you even get to setting up.
Yeah. I mean, do you throw caution to the wind or do you err on the side of caution? And what do you really lose by being a little more cautious in your
Yeah.
approach? I don't know.
Yeah, as I get a little bit older now, I probably be trying to get some more chores done at the house than getting out there at like
Yeah.
noon and 1 o'clock, which is a little unfortunate maybe.
Right.
But I start creeping more on that. Time's a precious commodity, so I minimize that. But I think it's a good thing if you can get out there early and stick it out. I probably sat for 5 or 6 hours before I got an arrow in this guy, but there isn't nothing wrong with that because sometimes they move early. I killed one actually in the same marsh, different spot, and this is actually a good one to mention. I don't have a photo of it here. You can probably find it on the Beast. I think it was 2016, so almost 10 years later. And I came in fairly early on that one, like middle of the afternoon. Same kind of setup, totally different area. But I got on this Oak Island and I knew I was really close to their bedding. I mean, very, very close on this one. In fact, it turned out too close. That buck heard me getting everything up, and I no sooner got my bow pulled up into the tree and he was already circling the island. And I must have just made the right amount of noise to get him up out of his bed. That I don't know if he thought it was another buck, tearing up a bush or what. But I got an arrow in that buck like 20 minutes after I sat. Probably not even. It's probably like 5 minutes after I sat up. And that was pretty early in the afternoon. I mean, that was like September 20th, somewhere around there, kill that happened at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something. So early is, especially early season, I don't mind being too early. That's for sure.
Sure.
Can I ask you one question about that buck? The tree that you hunted out of, did you pre-pick that the year before, or did you pick it as you're sneaking in there based on the wind and the thermals, or did you already have that location picked? How'd you end up in that exact tree?
Yeah, this particular spot, and actually you can see it if you put that photo back up, Scott. I didn't realize
Sure.
this until now. You can actually see my climbing stick on the tree. I thought I could see it. Well, it's kind of behind my head there. That is the tree I was sitting in.
Yeah.
So there's another smaller one kind of right next to it. But to answer Dan's question, there's a little small row of trees in this spot, so I had to sit one of those trees. But I did not know which particular tree I wanted to sit until I got up there, and that was just based on kind of the situation with the wind. Any of those trees are kind of sittable in that particular spot. But it is kind of a big theme, and I know, again, I'll probably keep repeating myself on this, that these are kind of like known tactics now, but every one of the hunts I'm going to talk about tonight was 100% mobile, first sit, first kill. Stand was on my back. I picked the tree out in the moment and killed the buck. I didn't have oh, I'm going to sit this exact tree now. It was kind of making a call as I got to the situation, kind of feeling it out. And that was exactly what happened on that buck. That tree just happened to work, but I could have made any of those other ones work because I had the right setup. I actually used to hunt with a climber, and I ditched that lone wolf climber probably in that 2005, 2006 era because it was just too limiting. I couldn't, I was always picking the beanpole tree because it was easier to climb versus the one, and I knew it. It'd be like, I need to be in that tree 20 yards over, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is.
Oh yeah.
And, again, I think most everyone kind of knows that common knowledge a lot more now, but that is a real key to killing more bucks is being able to be mobile enough that you can just make that call on the spot.
Sure. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to buck number 2 here.
All
This
right.
one's a little bit different than the first one, huh?
A little bit different, yep. We'll kind of go to the other spectrum here.
Sure.
I think score wise, and I'm a measurer for both Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young these days, so I have a pretty good idea what I'm doing when it comes to score on animals and things. At least I like to think I do.
Nice.
When I got the tape measure on them, it's sometimes a little different story. But yeah, this is my personal best Iowa public land kill, and this one's quite a story, kind of how this guy developed. This happened to be my second time down to Iowa, and I think my biggest tip, friends go to Iowa and they ask me, tips on Iowa, what to do. Joe Rietmeister, actually saw someone call him out in the comments here. I think it was his first time hunting Iowa last year, and he and I had a lot of long drives and talked tactics. And my number one advice is, especially if you killed a few bucks, is don't shoot the first 120-inch deer that walks by you. That's what I did my first time down in Iowa. But this was my second time down, and so I had a little bit of intelligence on kind of the general area. And Dan and I were just talking about this before the show. I like to come back to the same areas when I'm hunting out of state, if it worked out before. If I feel like I learned some things, I like to build on that experience and keep stacking that. And I know, Dan, you said for you like the variety of like a new challenge, which I totally get. That's why I like to keep adding new states to my resume for that same aspect. But this was a case of definitely hunting the same general area. And the other thing too, that tag doesn't come around a whole lot. I think it took 3 years on this one before I drew a tag. So I dumped my whole season into Iowa. I just kind of said, I can hunt late season in Wisconsin. I'm putting every minute I have to going down there. So just to kind of set the stage for the season, I was basically working hard all week, and then like Friday at noon, busting down there from opening day, October 1st, all the way through rut. I mean, every spare moment I could get, I was running down there to put time in, and I was pretty dead set on holding out for something really stellar, just because the opportunity doesn't come around a ton for that tag. So this is all hill country, northeastern Iowa.
Okay.
Not dropping geo coordinates or anything, but to give people the general area. So it's pretty good hill country here, and there's a lot of public in these areas, which is great. A lot different than what we have here in western Wisconsin. And now we're up to like camera time. So I do like to run cameras where you can legally out of state, which in Iowa here, I know there was some controversy last year about that, but at this time we can run. I think you still can this year. I don't have a tag this year, unfortunately, but I was running cameras, a few cell cameras, a lot of non-cell cameras, and that just helps me narrow in, especially when I want to kill a more mature buck. And this particular ridge where I ended up starting to zero in on this buck I'll be honest in that this particular buck was not a target early in the season. I didn't actually get a photo of this guy until kind of late October, but I have kind of a funny story that I put together after the fact about this guy. I think I was hunting this ridge system probably early to mid October. And so generally, I'm not putting a lot of time in there unless I'm really zeroed in on something. And I had so many good, I mean, this was like my best year of hunting ever down there. I had so many big buck encounters. I actually ended up big double split G2 buck. I
Okay.
was hanging my top step, like one of my first hunts in this ridge system, and he walked by me at like 20 yards. My bow was on the ground, and my top step was up there. Kind of a similar thing with that buck I described, where I think I made a little too much noise close to the bedding and got him up. He didn't spook, but he just happened to walk by. So that was kind of a heartbreaker. But I think probably that same weekend or shortly after, I'd moved down the ridge and I'm making kind of micro adjustments. And by micro adjustments, I mean I might move 100 yards, 200 yards, and I do that a lot, especially in hill country. That doesn't work in the marsh country. I don't find quite as much, but in hill country, I like to make a lot of little adjustments. I never like hunting the same tree twice. I like moving around a bit on these ridge systems. And I was kind of moving down this ridge system, trying to figure out how these deer were kind of using it. And this day, I don't normally, and this is kind of a funny story. I normally save my bathroom duties for before or after the hunt, but this was one of those afternoons where it was like I just got to take care of this thing, and I hadn't hung my stand yet, so my sticks and stand were like at the base of the tree, and I just figured, okay, I'm gonna go down into this real steep, almost creek bottom, and kind of do my business. So I'm only gonna have to move maybe 50 to 75 yards below my stand, straight down into a really steep ditch. And I did that, and I was getting done and heading back up thinking, okay, that worked out pretty clean. I didn't hear anything bust out. And as I'm climbing back up out of the ditch, I hear behind me a deer getting up, which later on it turns out it's that buck that we just had the photo up on. He was bedded kind of halfway up this ridge next to a bush in kind of a, wouldn't call it a clear cut, but it was like a recently cut side. So it was real thick and it was kind of hard to see into, and he boogied up out. But I just remember the distinctual rack shape and seeing lots of points. And I didn't think as much of it. I don't think I got a great look at him, to be honest, is what happens. Because I didn't connect the dots on that being him until later on. But I dropped a camera sometime early then, probably on one of those hunts in this ridge. And this one was a cell camera. And I was just getting some phenomenal bucks up on this ridge. I had a standout. I had this guy that showed up like around Halloween. But before that, I had this 160-inch 10-point, just super clean, big, heavy 10. And that was the buck I was after. That was the one I really wanted to kill. Because again, I didn't see this guy in camera until a little later. And it was October 30th and 31st. I put in 2 hunts back to back, and I kind of saved my hunt right for that time. And I think by that time I had a photo of this guy now. So I kind of had one of these spots where, okay, there's a couple bucks in here I would definitely target. But when you're on out-of-state hunts, it's kind of hard to say, like, yeah, I'm throwing it all away on this one buck. I mean, if that 160 was going to come by, I'm taking that opportunity. And that's what happened on Halloween. So that 160 came out, and I had, honestly, the best day of hunting I've ever had. I did all day sit up on this ridge waiting on one of these bucks. And there must have been a hot doe in this particular ridge. I had bucks on top of me all day. I have great footage from that day, and I think probably not a stretch to say like 15 different bucks that day cruised by me. And Iowa was just a different place than what I'm used to back in Wisconsin. But this was just an exceptional day on top of it.
Was that video that you had with the 2 bucks fighting right below you?
Man, you got a good memory. That is the day. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a couple 130-inch bucks or something like that. I mean, they look pretty nice. That's for sure.
Yeah, I had a knockdown, drag out buck fight like mid-morning below me. that I filmed. It was loud. I mean, really loud. I thought some hunter was like cracking antlers together until they started rolling and seeing them coming in. But anyway, I got an opportunity at that 160 and took kind of a weird squatting shot at him. And he was with a doe and missed him clean. And arrow sailed under him. So I was really dejected after that. And after having kind of put a couple hunts in on that ridge, I just sort of felt like, I don't like to overhunt an area. And to me, like putting in two, like an early season hunt and then two more like that in the rut on that ridge, that's like it. That's like, Dan would probably say he would have quit maybe on the first one, but it's you're putting a lot of pressure in there, and I wasn't the only guy in there. I actually had another camera probably only like 30 yards from my camera, and I actually take a moment on this hunt to call out this hunter because I hope he hears this or sees this. But this other guy that was hunting there, and I heard from another local friend local to the Iowa area that this guy was hunting the same buck that we see pictured here. And this dude, I beat him out there the couple times that October 30th and 31st. I think he might have came out both times. And we did the headlamp bump in the dark. I was already sitting in my stand. He came over the rise, kind of coming into the same thing, and gave me the headlamp and just turned around and went the other way. And that is some awesome public land etiquette. I've had a lot of different experience with hunters, and that guy had every bit same right I did to be hunting these bucks and getting in there. And man, that was cool. Just kind of knowing later on after the fact that we were both kind of after, some of the same deer there. But I'm sure he probably clocked plenty of hunts in there too. But I always kind of assumed he had photos of this deer because his camera wasn't far from mine. So, how could you not? But I guess it's possible that he maybe didn't. There were enough good bucks in that area that a guy was going to hunt this thing. So,
just real quick, it's kind of interesting though. I mean, just a little bit ago, you had talked about how you maybe had hunted that spot, maybe even, a couple times too many. And Dan, if you can chime on this too, what are your thoughts then when you know for a fact that there's another guy in there as well? Now you're doubling up the amount of scent and that, and you're not knowing exactly how many other hunts are in there. How does that factor into the whole process, I guess, of trying to decide if this is how long you should stay there or not? And Dan, I'd like to hear from you as well.
yeah, for me, I base it on kind of activity, like what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing for the hunt, especially in Iowa. I think here where, I'll just say it, the pressure is different here in Wisconsin. I would never put multiple hunts in on a ridge system like that. I'd probably be moving after one encounter with another hunter. But in Iowa, it's just different deer density, different deer buck to doe ratio, mature buck to doe ratio. So I can push it a lot more there with more hunts. But I certainly, and I can talk a little bit about, I had a tag last year that I didn't fill in Iowa, and I had way different pressure. Even though it's generally the same tags they give out in this area, I had a really tough year with pressure in Iowa last year. So I had to bounce a lot more because of hunter encounters, particularly a lot of squirrel hunters. The squirrel hunting in northeastern Iowa is like nothing I've ever experienced down there before.
Southwest Wisconsin is not very different at all.
Yeah, I had to move a lot because of squirrel hunters, which I didn't experience in the hunt for this guy.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, pressure is a weird thing. Kind of like James alluded to, like in Wisconsin, it's different. But a lot of it is that in Wisconsin, I'm sure James, just like me, knows the areas intimately. And you can get around a guy. You can figure out, okay, well, this is where he's hunting. This is what I'm going to do, to get on this buck without interrupting this guy's hunt or vice versa. But you get down to areas like Iowa. When I hunted in Iowa, there was a lot of pressure, but people were passing a lot. They weren't shooting, smaller deer. Even though there was a lot of pressure, there was a lot of deer. Seeing 25 in a day was nothing. But you still wanted to avoid people because people would mess areas up. but it was hard to completely avoid him. There, and if it was a good hunter and he slipped in there every now and then, if you could just find how that deer was getting around that person, because most people still, hunt the same favorite trees and stuff. And if you can just keep moving from tree to tree and area to area and kind of pin that deer down around somebody. But I couldn't find hardly anything where I found big bucks in Iowa where I didn't find trail cameras and hunter sign.
Yeah.
I mean, cameras were everywhere, so you can't avoid the pressure completely.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, I had a walking into this ridge system, and I was one of those two October 30th, 31st hunt. I ran into another kid that was on the opposite side of the ridge, but basically the same system. He had just been hunting the opposite side from me, and he told me that he killed like a 150 right where I was because we were trying to kind of coordinate coming back. I think that was the 30th, and he was coming back the next day too. He had left his stand. And so there was pretty good pressure right in there. So after I missed that bigger guy on the 31st, we came back in in the next morning just to grab my arrow because I had left it sticking in the dirt. I knew I missed him, but we wanted to make sure and kind of check everything over. So a buddy of mine came with me. So that was kind of it. Like with us tromping around in there a little bit the next day, it was like that ridge was just totally burned in my mind, put it out of my memory. So now I'm rolling into November 1st, and I had quite a good run of vacation. I had an Iowa tag this year, so I dumped as much vacation at that time that I could. So I was off now for a good run of days, and I hunted hard. I mean, every day, all day hunts, bumping around different public parcels. I never came back to this ridge system, and had a lot of hunts, a lot of hard hunts. Again, just bouncing around different parcels, kind of chasing different bucks on camera as you do. And I never did get, right around Halloween, I got some photos of that non-typical, like a couple different day sequences. And actually one was like right on the edge of daylight too. But I never got any more. I left the camera there, but I never got any more photos of him. So, part of me is thinking that area is messed up. Those big bucks are kind of blown out of there. So fast forward to November 9th, and my buddy Greg he had a tag that year too, and he killed like just a few days earlier from that. And so I was kind of losing my cameraman, and now I'm talking like 10 days straight of all day hunts, and you get a little burned out, and I was a little burned out. And I needed to recharge, and I find sometimes when you're doing especially like long rut hunts like that, all it takes is like one little recharge. Like you take a morning off or an afternoon off. I mean, you can be lowest of lows, feeling burnt out, like you want to hang it up. And I've done that before where you kind of, maybe you want to go back early or just throw it in a little bit, even though you got some time left. All it takes is like a morning or an afternoon of just, I went to the laundromat, did some laundry, and I knew November 10th, I think that was a Tuesday. I think I took like Monday afternoon off. I think I moved some cameras around or something Monday morning. I knew Tuesday we had a big rain system coming in, and I don't know why, but I was kind of hell-bent on hunting in that rain. It was kind of forecasted to be one of those long hovering systems that was sticking around, but it wasn't going to be like downpour. It was going to be kind of, misty, kind of pissy rain for a day. So I actually went to a local archery shop in the town there and bought a set of rain gear because I didn't have anything with me. I was just dead set on sitting for the day. And I was going to go sit this public parcel a fair amount of ways away from this area. So again, totally different area. And my buddy Greg had some pictures of a pretty couple different bucks that I would definitely like to shoot. He kind of encouraged me, hey, you should go sit that one drainage where I had those 2 bucks just like a couple days ago. This is right before he left, like the day before he left. And I said, yeah, okay, that's a good plan. So I got myself all refreshed at that afternoon off, had my rain gear, and I got up really early the morning of the 10th. I wanted to get in early, get in the spot. He was getting pretty consistent photos of these bucks, so I was feeling pretty confident that we had them kind of narrowed down into this one little drainage that they kind of kept consistently coming by on camera. It was a fairly blind spot. Greg had done the work on this one. I hadn't, so I was really kind of hunting on his intelligence, but he kind of said this was the general area, go feel it out. And I got into this spot on November 10th, and I'm parking off a road. I'm not even in a parking spot on this one. It was kind of a sneaky little entrance to get into this little drainage. And I kid you not, I get there, complete downpour, like questionable if I want to get out of my truck. And here is a guy in his truck parked exactly where I want to park. And it is 2 hours before, sun up. So now you're like, what do you do? I kind of think this guy, I kind of think I might know where he's at, but I'm not positive. But I was committed at that point. I was already in my rain gear. So I said, heck with it, threw everything on, get my stand, go down there, hang a stand in the rain, which is just the worst. Get up there. And this is a funny story, and it kind of leads up to this buck. But it was not even sunrise. And I think I saw a 2-year-old buck and was having an okay little sit to start the day. I hadn't been sitting long. And I hear what I think is an arrow, like a bow shot. Well, it turns out it was a bow shot, go off 100 yards kind of above me up in this thick ridge. And I see a doe go squirting through this opening by me. And pretty soon I can hear a guy talking really loud, like audibly talking. Yeah, yep, hit him. No, I went right down. I can hear almost everything this guy is saying. I'm thinking, oh, geez, like we were right on top of each other pretty much. Never saw headlamps or anything. And pretty soon, kind of waiting, figuring out what am I going to do? Am I going to sit it out, or how am I going to deal with this situation? And here comes the guy walking with his stand, and the buck head he's already had skun it out and started quartering it, and the buck head was strapped to his stand, and I'm sitting there with the binocs looking at it, and I can see it's this big buck I was after in there. It had a broken G2, real distinctive broken G2 on it, and it was the broken G2 buck. I thought, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I killed the buck right above me. So of course as soon as he started walking that ridge above me, I started packing everything up, and now I just kind of wanted to get down and go congratulate the guy, which I did. So I caught up to him. He was still at his truck waiting for his dad to come help him get the rest of this deer out in his stand or whatever else, and congratulate the guy and stuff. And we had a good laugh about that. And he said, oh yeah, that buck was gonna definitely go right back down where you were. He was pushing that doe off this private bean field and working down to your ridge system. So we had a good talk, and the guy let me take a photo of that buck. And to this day, I always wanted to finish my side of the story to that guy's, because he had a heck of a morning, and then I had a heck of a day after that. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, well, you deserve a great buck for sitting in this rain. Because I talked about, I'm like, I'm going back out hunting. I'm just going to make another move now. And so still kind of rain, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And I thought back to a hunt I had in this ridge system. So kind of where I missed that 160, I hunted the opposite side of that ridge. So it's kind of a big ditch and up another ridge. I hunted the opposite side years ago when I had my first tag. And I remember how bucks kind of moved to that area. And that was the side of the ridge that I had that encounter with that buck when I was doing my business down in that ravine. So I kind of started thinking, okay, well, maybe there's a chance he's just only using that other side of the ridge, and we'll get a crack at him, right? So got in midday on this guy, and again, I wasn't crawling to my tree on a rainy day, but I tiptoed in there, and this was about 2.5 miles to take the route that you had to take. I could have just cut down. There was a much shorter way. I could have cut off probably half or more of the distance and just snuck through this ridge and gone down and up. I would have been blown through all the bedding, and I would have totally blown my opportunity at this hunt. So I had to take this crazy, ridiculous long way around, which it sounds terrible. In Iowa, they got trails all over on this public land. That's something we don't have here like that in Wisconsin. Is their trail systems are a lot better, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. But regardless, it was a really long hike on this one, and raining, got set up, and it was kind of high noon. So November 10th, high noon. As I was kind of getting to the tree in the general area where I wanted to be, and I was kind of selecting a tree based on how I remember deer using that ridge the previous time I was there on my first Iowa hunt. That was kind of what I was basing it on. Other than that, I was just kind of looking at how the wind, checking it with my milkweed, kind of looking at trees. And when I'm in a situation like that, I just kind of slow down, like just to a crawl, and start throwing milkweed and just kind of starting to look at trees, looking at trails, trying to pick, how kind of doing a lot of visualization, to be honest. How are deer coming through? How they moved through, or how have I seen them from that previous hunt? Picked a tree out, got set up, and actually had a doe and a fawn kind of move through while I was setting my stand, which I thought was a good thing. That deer up in their feet and moving and everything. Waited about, got set on this guy, waited about an hour, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a doe come up out of this thick ditch, kind of right in front of me. And a moment later, here comes this guy. And it took half a second of looking at his rack to know exactly which buck it was. And obviously, I'm shooting. And, I always get a fair amount of buck fever even after, I think 30 plus buck kills in my lifetime or something, like nice bucks. I still get it. I think if I didn't get a little degree of that buck fever, I probably wouldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
On this guy, I mean, I knew what buck it was, so I wasn't looking at antlers or anything. But I found myself trying to force the shot earlier than I needed to. He was with that doe and he was very calm. And I drew back on him at like 35 yards, and I'm feeling a little rushed, like I got to get a shot on this guy, and that just wasn't the case. It was raining. Both of them were pinned down and they were not moving. And I got myself settled down, let my bow down, and just said, just give him time. He's going to filter by you here. She's kind of moving the right way. So I ended up getting a shot at him at 13 yards and put a heart shot on him, which had I taken that 35-yard shot, I almost guarantee I probably would have screwed it up. But shot him through the heart. Didn't get to see him go down, which was pretty agonizing to watch him kind of run through this little ditch and up into an opening and then burst, but he didn't go far. Made an excellent shot on him. And
Nice.
yeah, so a lot of kind of weird things, plus I would say good tactics came together on how this one happened. Had that guy not shot that buck, kind of forced me to relocate, was a really odd aspect to this thing. And I had kind of given up on the spot just based on how much I blew it up. But it was the difference in, honestly, as the crow flies from where I had my camera to where I ended up killing this guy, couldn't have been more than like 200 yards. But it felt like a whole different world on that opposite ridge in terms of the deer I saw there, how they were moving. So I really believe this buck was spending the majority of his time where I had that early season unfortunate encounter with him and where I ended up killing him. And I was just getting fringe photos of him. It might have just been those couple days, right around Halloween, that he decided to kind of use that other ridge. And it probably was my pressure and that other guy's pressure that kept that buck, off that other ridge. And there was enough other competing bucks over there too. But he was locked up with a doe, right where he was probably spending most of his time.
Sure. Well, it's an incredible buck, and I forget at the beginning if you said did you put tape on this buck?
I didn't, because you can't. If you're putting one in the books, you can't officially measure them yourselves.
Okay.
And this one's kind of a gnarly one to measure, but yeah, I think he's in. I'm staring at it here, 177.
Nice. Very cool. A lot of character.
Very small body. I know this photo doesn't show the body.
Oh, really?
I think 163 pounds dressed out, and he looked like kind of a dwarf, like very, very like dwarf deer. I mean, like just a very odd small body.
Wow.
Yep.
All right.
Age-wise, we kind of put him at about like a 4-year-old.
Okay. Dan, do you have anything you want to chime in, or do you want to move on to buck number 3?
You can move on to buck number 3. It's just an all-around great hunt.
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, I hunted that. I hunted that ridge system again last year when I had an Iowa tag. totally different. I had to bail. I think I put one early season and one late season hunt in there, and there was way more pressure in there. And the year I killed this guy, there were rubs like you wouldn't believe. I mean, like right now, sign. There, it was just stale. There was no good rubs in this ridge system. It was getting overhunted, so I don't know if like word of, the kind of quality in that little ridge system of bucks guys were getting kind of got out, or this buck got out, kind of word, and like guys like to hunt where a big one was killed. It just felt like that. And in fact, the one day I did sit there, and this was kind of opposite of the experience I had with the really polite etiquette guy I was talking about earlier. I had a kid come in on me in the morning, like 9 a.m., prime rut, when I was sitting this ridge, and came through and walked all the bedding. He waved at me, walked through all the bedding behind me, just blew all that system out. I don't know what he was doing. Looked like he was scouting or something, but he saw me and didn't care and kept going. And I pulled my stand and never came back to that ridge system that year.
Sure.
So stuff changes. I mean, that's doesn't stay good forever. Sometimes you can get a couple out of one area like that on public, but a lot of times, in my experience, it's one and done too.
That's a good point because you look back, and I've had a lot of really good spots where you can kill deer year after year after year. But those big ones, usually once you kill them, that's like you're not killing another big one, or you got to go find another big one. That's the one that was living there, and it's like you got to keep bouncing around a little bit. You can hunt an area or whatever, but you got to bounce around a little bit to find one to hunt. And you can't just rely on those spots to keep producing giants.
Yeah, you can get really stuck. I've seen other guys get pretty stuck sitting spots that's produced for them before, and they keep burning hunt after hunt. And like bouncing is what has always worked for me. And once again, this was like I described, obviously a hang and hunt. First time sitting that tree and got it done. So staying mobile was key.
All right. Well, let's keep it moving here. About an hour in, and moving on to buck number 3 here.
All right. Well, this will probably be a little shorter one because this was a shorter hunt, but I thought this would kind of be interesting being this was last year's kill, and
Okay.
Dan was actually just a unit away from me hunting public land at the same time I was down here. I don't think either of us even knew we were in the area hunting. But obviously, based on the photo here, I called the dog tracker. I'll get into that. But it was the dog tracker, Michael, who was talking to Dan and said, "Hey, you're friends with Dan, right? He's hunting down here." I said, "No, I did." And then I get a text from Dan, "Congrats." But the reason I kind of put this one in is I wanted to talk a little bit about getting comfortable out of state and kind of limited time and kind of why this one stands out because I think I've gotten to a spot where I've gotten pretty comfortable making things happen quick with limited time out of state. And Kansas for me is one of those destination states where I can't do the thing I described in northeastern Iowa where I can get down there on weekends because it's only a short drive. I really have to put in a run of days in Kansas because it's a lot of time for me to get down there. I got to burn a whole day at least just driving to get to the area. So be a lot harder for me to do kind of that consistent, weekend type hunting. So this one happens to be a story that happened on a permission farm. And I think for guys out there that, it's you can't find permission farms anymore. It's impossible to get on. Everything's leased up. I hunt permission farms here in Wisconsin. I have this permission farm in Kansas. It's out there and it can be done. You have to, basically what it kind of comes down to for me is making friends with the landowners, not even necessarily like in every case with a lot of my permission farms, it's not always like, hey, I'm trying to get access to this land or hunt on this land. It's becoming friends with someone and then an invite kind of somehow makes its way out. But that's kind of what I have going on with this farm I hunt in Kansas. The first year that I got permission on this farm, he invited me in, older gentleman, and he said the rule on his farm is 3-day hunts only. If we get one guest a year, and he's got a kind of some other buddies that he owns the place with, and he said, we kind of have this rule: we can bring a guest down, but they only can hunt for 3 days for the season. So I'm going down there to hunt public land anyway. So I thought, what the heck, I'll put a couple days in on this guy's private farm and see what it's all about.
Right.
But you talk about putting a lot of pressure on yourself to make it happen quick when you only have 3 days to hunt. That was the situation with this farm last year, and just to set up context too, this is not a managed farm, anything but. He's got cattle on the farm through a certain date, plenty of pressure, ranchers going around with side-by-sides. He's got bad knees, so he uses a side-by-side to get out to his stands. The guy's a pretty die-hard bow hunter, but he doesn't get to this level of it, like kind of the craziness with the tactics that we do and all the out-of-state hunts and stuff. He just likes to hunt his farm. So, I help him out with some stuff there. Great friend now. But I got this 3-day pressure thing with Kansas. And so when I came down there last year, I kind of overdid it. And I had the Iowa tag and the Kansas tag. I ended up drawing both in the same year. And I was actually a little burned out on Iowa at this point. And it was like around November 3rd that I made a trip down there. Actually, November 4th. I believe that's when I remembering that right. I think that was the day I killed this guy. I got up super early in Iowa, drove down, kind of did the long haul, and I wanted to sit that day yet. And when I showed up, it was raining again. But after my Iowa kill that we just talked about, I'm never missing a rain day like that again. If it's that light rain, like not torrential downpour, I don't think that's great. But if it's that off and on, maybe a little light to like medium, at times heavy, I'm going to sit that, especially in the rut. The deer will move all day in my experience, and you can just catch them at different times. That was something I never believed in, to be honest. Different guys have talked about that, and I've read about it over years. Don't miss, sitting in the rain. And I'd put in a few hunts in the rain and never had success until that Iowa buck sitting in the rain, and that'll be it. Never look backwards on that kind of thing. It's a little bit miserable if you can't stand it, but especially in the rut. I'm not necessarily a fan of hunting in the rain in the early season. I did a lot of that in my younger years, and I found that in the really, really early season, bucks tend to just stay bedded until dark if it's raining, especially in hill country. That's been my experience. But in the rut, that rain gets them to move a lot more. So coming in on this hunt, the 2 years prior to this, I killed one on the farm, and I have like a little YouTube video on that one that I think I posted on the Beast, killing a buck in 3 days. And so kind of returning to that same farm, my setup was put some time in on the private, and then we'll move over to public when my time's up. And showed up on the farm, and landowner thought I was crazy. I said, hey, if you don't mind, I just showed up here, but I'd like to go hang a set and hunt. And he's like, he always says the same thing. He'll say, oh, if your ass can stand it. And I said, yep, I'm not missing a day in this rain. So he's like, I'll take you out to your stand. And I don't have a stand up, but I kind of told him generally where I was thinking of hunting that afternoon.
Sure.
And he's a big fan. It doesn't bother him that he'll drive around on the side by side. And it's kind of a weird, like, polite type situation. I can't not say, he's really wanting to take me out in a side by side, and I'm just not a fan of that. I don't want to get driven to like my tree. So we had kind of a compromise where I said, well, it's fine. You can drive me across the prairie, but when we get about halfway across, I almost had to beg him, like, I can walk from here. This is fine. Like, I'll walk in the rain. It's totally good. And I kind of convinced him of that one day. He was kind of chuckling. Like, he thinks that's crazy that, I would, first of all, he thinks it's kind of crazy that I hang my own stand and do that every single time I hunt. But, so I'm doing both these things and refusing a drive and, refusing to hunt a preset stand. But this year was a little bit, he kind of took an interest in it. He had never run cameras before, and he kind of went crazy with the cameras. So he went from 0, never run them, to then last year he kind of canvassed his farm and he's just having a blast with it now. So he's like really enjoying his property. He's a remote landowner, so he's not there all the time. So he just loves keeping an eye on everything. So I had pretty good intelligence, unlike the first time I hunted there where I had no idea what bucks were around. I had a pretty good idea of what was around, and there were two pretty big shooters, this one included, and those were really the only two that I would really wanted to get a shot at before moving off to public. And both these bucks kind of disappeared. To be honest, there weren't a lot of photos of them leading up until going down there. And kind of why I wanted to highlight this with the cattle in there, this is a strategy I've been kind of employing in Kansas there. And Dan and I talked about this a little bit. Like you're dealing with a lot of cattle and pasture, it seems like, both on the walk-in public in Kansas and even private, and that's the case here. And I kind of like to pick where I hunt based on where the cattle aren't. I don't think that the cattle bug the deer. I mean, they're seeing each other all the time, but I found that the deer and the cattle aren't like in the same exact pasture spending time together. So I kind of try to dissect the farm based on talking to the landowner, what pastures were the cattle in most recently and where were they not? And I can kind of tell how the deer are using this farm where they like to stay in that thicker, even though it's only maybe knee high, because the cattle maybe weren't in there getting it worn down quite as much. That seems to make all the difference to me in my experience in Kansas. And I've been fortunate to kill every time I've gone down to Kansas, whether on public or private. But that's been a real key tactic is just the subtle differences. And it's, in this particular spot, the pasture, they had it mowed down to a putting green just on the other fence line, like just adjacent to this little kind of ditch draw that I was hunting. But that makes a big difference on where they feel comfortable bedding, I think, and spending more time. So I crawled down this little drainage. This particular property in a lot of Kansas, it's different to me in that there is not a lot of cover. It's little drainages and real little thick choke down draws. And it's very small. It's kind of like precision hunting. So wind really comes into play there because if you're kind of moving in on these deer, and this buck, by the way, he was bedded at the time I set up, I believe. And there was actually a preset stand that the landowner had probably 15 yards from the tree I ended up setting in. And I just remember thinking, if I had to sit in that preset stand, that is the wrong tree. It's only 15 yards away from me, but the wind, it's really weird. It'd be hard to even describe, but there's kind of like some converging ditches and little tiny hillsides. It's not, I wouldn't describe it hill country. It's more like these little draws, like miniature coulees almost.
Sure.
And wind really moves kind of weird in those. So I just had to be in this one tree, and this one was a very marginal wind. And when that rain stopped, when it came to basically a stop, like just a drizzle, this buck got up, and I was not in my stand for an hour on this guy. And he came in, ended up 30-yard shot, ended up hitting him further back than I wanted to, and I knew I was back. And Michael, shout out to his dog service. I've never used a dog before on a track job, and his little beagle you see there, Bo is his name. I think that's the name of his deer tracking. Bo deer tracking, something like that. He's on the beast. Yeah, I don't know if he's not in chat here, but good dude. But I backed out. I left my arrow sticking in the ground. I called Michael up. We talked over the scenario. He said he wanted to leave it 18 hours. I think we just ended up deciding to leave it till morning. And Bo literally walked right to the buck. But the buck had ended up living for a little while for sure. The way he was facing his back track, he didn't go very far. He probably went 100 yards from the shot, but he kind of crept up on this little cedar ridge there and just laid down and was watching his back track. Dead when Bo found him, but it was hard to say. Definitely would have been a mistake to try to track and follow up on that buck afterwards. I had a good idea how I hit him.
Sure. Awesome. Dan?
Yeah, great hunt. Not much to add. The only thing I would say is that I had to chuckle a little bit about the landowner stuff because it seems like every time I get permission on a property like that, there's always some sort of like little things you have to deal with the landowners.
Oh yeah.
When we were down in Kansas last year, I was kind of remotely hunting. There's like a guy I know that's Steve Morris from Maine was hunting down there, and we were, talking back and forth, and he had gone out, got down there early, and spent like a month just getting landowner permission, and he got permission on like 100 properties. He never even hunted all the properties he had permission on, but one of the properties that was a walk-in where he could hunt, he didn't want to park on the side of the road, so he stopped and knocked on the walk-in doors properties at their house, and they said, yeah, you can hunt here all you want, park in the driveway, and but we'd just like to ask you one favor. Please don't shoot the giant non-typical that beds in our backyard, and they show him pictures of it. It's like a pet. So he's like, I couldn't even hunt because of this deer. If he wouldn't have knocked on the door and he would have just went in, which was legal access, he could have hunted it.
Oh man. That's a tough one right there for sure.
Yeah, there's always kind of little quirky things like that, but hey, I'm there on permission. Who's me to knock it or question it too much. But it was funny. I had to almost beg him, like, don't drive me to the exact spot I'm going, because in his mind, he's kind of got that attitude of the side-by-sides don't bug the deer at all. And to some degree, I agree, but I think you can booger up a mature buck. And this was a super mature buck too. I don't know if it would have worked out the same way. He might not have spooked out of his bed, but I would have been concerned that he goes the opposite way than the way I needed him to come.
Or at least pays attention to where he heard that noise from.
That's what I mean. And I needed him to come from the noise direction. So worked out.
Well, congrats on that. And that was just last year, you said, correct?
Yep, that was last year.
Nice. All right, well, let's go ahead and keep this train moving here and move on to buck number 4.
All right. This is a number of years ago. Buck I called Fresh Prince. This again is on another, probably for obvious reasons, right? Nice high and tight rack.
Yep.
Kind of an interesting buck. We've had a few. This is a permission farm here in Wisconsin, hill country. So this is major hill country, and again, not a managed farm. We shoot pretty decent bucks there every now and then, but we're not running food plots or traditional managed farm. We just try to do what we can to let deer go. So just kind of a little setup of context of how we hunt this place. And this is a farm I've hunted for quite a long time. So I know how deer generally move through the property. I'm still bouncing around. I'm always hanging hunting. So even on a property like this where I have pretty permanent permission to hunt, I'm not leaving stands up. I'm always moving around. I'm always hanging and hunting. Rare exception in the rut is when I'll make an exception and I will do an afternoon or all day hunt. I might leave a set for that night, come back to it in the morning. That's something I like to do in rut scenarios, but otherwise I like to always keep moving. And I'll even make movements during the same day. I might take a set down and move it 15 yards, 30 yards, 50 yards if I think deer are moving a little bit different. But this particular buck, guys, I thought this would be an interesting one to talk about because this is one of those totally nocturnal bucks. We had a lot of photos of him 2 years running. Never a daytime photo. Never got an early season daytime photo. Never got a evening photo. And so he was a little bit of a mystery that way. I actually didn't think he was a shooter. I was probably going a little too much off antler size. And my hunting buddy I hunt this farm with, Mike, he's an arrow bender on the forum. He was like, absolutely, it's a mature buck. We got to shoot that one. So we had a little differing opinion on him. But I was kind of like, it doesn't matter. We never see this guy anyway. He's one of these nocturnal bucks, we all like to say. But this season I had a particularly hard season where I just wasn't getting on deer. We had a pretty big, kind of near non-typical, probably 160s buck that I screwed up on this particular farm early season. Had a quick opportunity at him, like opening day. never saw him again. And after that, it got really tough. But this buck was around. We'd get photos of him at night. I just couldn't put anything together. Never getting an encounter with him. And so I was getting pretty deep into the rut. And I started kind of thinking, I got to think outside the box. What, this is 80 acres that we're hunting. So, okay, so this is not, you think about 80 acres, you think I can cover every little nook and cranny of that 80 pretty easily, especially some place that you've hunted for a decade or more. There's nothing new. And I think that's kind of a standout lesson on this one that I learned. I spent some time really thinking and starting to look at photos on this buck and trying to put together, okay, what do we know on this guy? Like there's got to be something here. He's got to be killable somehow, something I'm missing. And I started looking at the photos and I started realizing we're always getting him in one particular spot. And he's not that far off nighttime. We get occasional photo of him where he's just outside shooting. There's got to be an opportunity on this buck somehow. And there's a little edge of the property that gets real steep. I mean, like super, super steep. And it's very difficult to hunt because we always like to hunt, hill country. Dan talks about this. Everyone should know you like to hunt kind of that top third. If you're not hunting up kind of near that thermal tunnel or the top third, winds just get weird. They get really swirly and get really tough on you. You get busted more than things work out generally. So we're always kind of hunting on the top. So I started thinking creatively on this buck. I'm going to hunt low. I'm going to throw a hunt in this guy and hunt low, which is something that I just don't do. I might have done that in younger years, but I don't like to do it. But this particular day, this ridge, or kind of a coulee, has mostly a north-south kind of run to it. And this upcoming day, I had like a real stiff one. In fact, I have a video of this day. I was cutting across the cornfield and I had to chuckle because it was one of those days the corn cobs and it was a picked field and all the loose tassels and stuff are just whipping. It was like a 40, 50 mile an hour gust kind of day. I mean, a day you hate to even be in a tree. But so that's what made me think, okay, I can maybe get away with a low hunt here because I have such a crazy wind today, and it's going kind of straight out of the south in that north-south ravine. I'm going to try mixing in a hunt. Now, I didn't hunt the dead bottom. I hunted just a little shelf up off the bottom, but where I could shoot to the bottom. And the wind was still a mess. I got down there and even when you think, okay, I got, it's one direction and it should just be cutting straight up this whole ravine, it was a mess down there. It was a swirly mess, catching everything. You'd throw a milkweed, it'd go one way. 5 minutes later, you'd see your milkweed coming back through the other way, going exactly where you think the deer are. And I think in this particular hunt, I don't know for a fact, but I think I caught the edge of his bedroom. And I have a feeling that my wind started getting mixed up in kind of this bottom. He moved on me fairly early. I think I set up kind of midday, and this was like I would say early to mid afternoon kill on this guy. And he came in off this point that was actually kind of off the neighbors onto ours, and I known that to be a bedding point. And I think he was laying up in his bed, and when he got into the bottom, he seemed super nervous. He was checking the wind, like he didn't know where the scent was coming from. No does or anything like that, even though this was rut. And he seemed very, very nervous. In fact, I had to whistle to get him to stop because he was moving at a pretty good clip. He wasn't running, but he was moving. And
Sure.
I whistled, got him stopped, and made a perfect double long shot on this guy. One of the rare ones, kind of like my buck number one, where I actually get to watch him fall down, which I always appreciate. But I thought it was an interesting hunt when you're thinking about how to hunt wind and especially hill country. To maybe don't discount mixing in a low hunt occasionally. Now, it could have gone the other way. I mean, he might have just gotten enough of my scent that he was out of there. But it was something that I learned mixing in a hunt, especially in a high wind day like that. And I do find that in those high wind days, yes, of course, leeward sides. We like to be on leeward sides, But hunting lower as that wind speed picks up, I've found something more to that. I think those deer like to generally move a little bit lower at times if the wind speed gets above a certain amount. And yeah, it worked out pretty interesting on this guy to mix that in. I don't know, Dan, if you've had any experience with lower hunts, something guys don't talk about as much. We've had a few posts on the Beast about it, hunting low, but it's a trap for sure, but worked out in this one.
Yeah, I've had good experience hunting low in the early morning. I find that the bucks are down lower for some reason earlier in the morning, and when it's really windy, I feel like they do get like down into those leeward areas lower, where it's still kind of calm. I mean, there's where they're not hearing all that noise, and because wind noise to a buck is pretty disturbing because they count on their hearing, they count on their scent, they count on their eyes, and when you take one of those out, which is hearing with high winds, it drives them nuts. So they're going to be in the spots that have like a vacuum of the wind, so the valleys, right, out of the wind.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think that morning, I've experienced that too. I can hunt lower in the morning generally. Those thermals they take a lot longer in the morning, especially at that time in the rut. I think you can stay down low for quite a while when the thermals are coming down. You have to watch it though, that you're not setting up where the deer can get under you where those thermals are kind of going, but they are pulling down generally speaking if you don't have too strong a wind, and that can be pretty late into the morning. So you can really play it to an advantage in the morning. This one happened to be an afternoon hunt, and I do think that it's way messier. The wind situations are way messier in the afternoon like that, because you got to deal with trying to get in too, not just not just like when you're in the tree, but what that approach kind of path is to your stand. In this case, I actually went way out of my way from kind of where that bedding is, just to take a very strategic route down to the spot so that any kind of swirly wind wouldn't get anywhere near them. But I think my scent probably had a factor with how that buck moved that day. Again, you can never be certain, but it worked out. But yeah, I won't discount mixing in a lower hunt, especially when you're trying to figure out a buck like this that we couldn't figure out how he was kind of using the terrain. And I think he was probably using that north-south ravine kind of on the edge of our property that we hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to that, or not as much attention anyway.
Sure. Well, congrats on that one too. So we're gonna get to James's fifth buck here, and this one's just a little bit different here because this isn't a buck that you were able to bring home with you. This is one of those ones that got away, something we're all familiar with, a buck that you've targeted or we're really hoping to get after, and just weren't maybe able to get it done here. But James, I'll let you kind of get into it here because we'll start up with the velvet pick here.
Yeah.
That you shared with me.
Yeah, this is a buck, different permission farm than the one we were just talking about. I haven't been hunting this farm as much, so I don't think we have as good of an understanding of how the deer move in. Again, similar conditions, not a managed farm, just a knock on door permission kind of place. Obviously, egg here, hill country again, more kind of coulee country, I would call it, but hill country tactics are in play. And this is a buck we had a few years history with. I hunt this particular farm with my brother-in-law, and this buck, we passed him up the first year that we had an encounter with him. He's always been very wide. That was kind of the distinguishing characteristic. The following year in 22, he really blew up, and we'd like to think we were hunting him. We never had an encounter. He was kind of one of these bucks that you have a window before that relocation happens. And I know a lot of the guys that, especially like the Iowa kind of guys that manage bigger farms, they can kind of track these deer, and like the Mark Juries, the world kind of talk about that shift whenever that shift happens. Can be subtle. Sometimes they don't shift much, but I think that must have been what happens with this guy because he'd be around. At least we get photos of him in September, and then first week in October he'd just vanish. We'd never get another photo of him again. So we're not really sure what would happen with him. So we knew kind of based on that the window was small to even get an opportunity on this guy. And camera history on this one definitely played into it a lot because other than the first year that we passed him up, we did not have any on the hoof encounters with this guy. We were just kind of purely going on camera intelligence to try to put the pieces together. And he's obviously a very big deer body wise.
Yeah.
Kind of a horse, really. So tracks were another aspect. He had a pretty distinguishable track that was not to be missed. When you saw his track, you knew that was him. But we really didn't have enough. You'd see his track to know, okay, he was here in the area, but it wasn't like you could backtrack him to really figure anything out. And so we kind of had some primary bedding areas pegged where we'd mix hunts in on this guy, but really couldn't put the puzzle together on him. And so the final year, 23, the photo you see here, I don't know if you have another photo of him.
Yeah, I do. Do you want me to pull that one up?
Yeah, out of velvet here. Here's another photo of him. Absolute horse of a deer. We had kind of a funny, we called him 1022 because we figured he was at least 22 inches inside spread and he was a clean 10. So that was our name for him always. And the back-to-back years, he kind of kept that massive spread. The 2 years we really hunted him hard. But I was mixing in a hunt. So let's see, that was September 30th, 23. So I was mixing in a hunt for him probably, I think I want to say September 28th. And we had gotten some photos of him in this spot. You see this photo here on the 30th is 8:16 p.m. I had some other photos of him in this inside corner, basically just outside of shooting hours, and he was getting up into this cornfield and trying to figure out what is his route, how is he getting to that corner. I'm trying to backtrack it back to where his bed is from
Sure.
and mixing in hunts. And one of the primary areas that I thought he might be traveling through, I was hunting on, I think it was September 28th, somewhere right in there. And it was kind of, again, once again, a little bit of rain that night. Wasn't like rain gear conditions, and it was early season, so it was warm, but it was a little bit of rain on and off. I did not see a deer that night. And I was a little dejected, and this is a lesson to anyone who hasn't experienced this before. Do not pack your gear early. Just sit out the last 10 or 15 minutes till end of legal shooting. And I knew that. I mean, I was an experienced hunter. This was just a couple of years ago. But it was one of those nights where I hadn't seen a deer, no sign of deer, so I started packing up early. And I think
You're just ready to kind of call it a night. You're like,
I had something going on probably, so I'm starting to think about dinner with my wife or something. So my bow was on the ground. I still had plenty of legal shooting yet. My bow is on the ground. I'm packing up my camera gear up in the tree. My bow is still on the pull rope, and it was kind of raining, just a little bit, little light mist, and I thought I heard tickling antlers. Like almost like a guy sparring, but there isn't neighbors really that hunt that close to like where I'm at or anything. So I'm listening again, and it's kind of hard to hear with a little bit of wind and the rain, and God, it seems like antlers, but I wasn't positive. It sounded like light tickling. So I just thought, well, I'll pull my bow back up. As I'm pulling my bow back up, here he comes. And now he's coming on the fence line kind of like a freight train. I mean, he is an absolute toad of a deer, and he's coming quick. I don't have my release on, and my bow is like just getting up to my hand now. So I get my bow up, and I'm digging in my pack for my release. I feel my release, what turned out actually being my backup release. Put my release on very hastily. He's already making it through my first shooting lane at this point, which is my ideal shooting lane where I should be shooting him, just a slam dunk shot. Now he's coming cutting through, and he's a little closer, but it's a steeper angle, and it's a little trickier kind of shooting through. Not much of a window, and felt like I got kind of settled on him okay. But it turned out it was my backup release, and I couldn't figure out why I was struggling getting that thing on. Well, that backup release jostles around in my pack, and gets grit and stuff in it, and I was having a hard time getting those jaws open and closed. I managed it, and I got the shot off. Thank God I didn't wound him. I ended up shooting right under him. I'm not sure if he knew what happened. Took a few big leaps, kind of down on this ridge below me. I knew it was a clean miss. I shoot lighted knocks. I see my, lighted knocks in there, and I'm just kind of chuckling to myself, like, here's my opportunity on this guy. After a couple of years of hunting him, I just blew it. And that photo you see there, September 30th, 23, I think we got maybe 1 or 2 days of photos after my miss with him. Obviously 8:16 p.m.s after shooting hours at this point, so it was all, and that was it. We never heard of a neighbor killing him. We thought, okay, maybe he just shifted again. He'd show up again in 2024. Never saw another photo of him. But here's kind of why I think the extra reason this one's an interesting story, and it actually dovetails in on some stuff Dan had posted, ironically, recently. So kind of where we park to access this property, it's just a little, not much traffic, little back road. We just kind of park in a ditch. There's not really a parking spot. And I was sitting so 2023. Now fast forward, it's rut. This guy is like kind of out of our lives. And across the road on the neighbors, there is old, it's like a pasture slash like old barn. Like the barn's nothing but a foundation now. A few
Okay.
buildings that you can just see shapes in, but it's a tiny little cluster of, I want to call it less than 5 acres, probably less than 3 acres. And I've noticed the neighbors never hunt that. They walk by it all the time. They park vehicles not that far away from it. Nobody, in fact, hunts this little, I call it a ditch, basically, where these old buildings used to be. And I happened to be, it was like October, and I happened to be sitting in my truck, and it was I don't know if I showed up late that day. I think I actually came out after a slow morning hunt and came back for a sandwich. But I was kind of sitting in my truck, just sort of daydreaming. And I look off in that little ditch there, and I see a mature buck stand up out of some taller grass right next to one of those little foundations in the building. Like, just a little concrete foundation. He's bedded and like wedged right in there. I watch him get up, shake himself off, and start taking off to go cruise for does or whatever. And I really got to thinking about that little ditch. I'm like, it'd be tough to even find a tree. You'd find some little box elder or something that's like grown up over everything. But I started thinking that is the direction this 1022 buck was always coming from. That's kind of, it was a distance, but starting to piece the puzzle together, he was definitely, and that was the night I got the shot at him from. That's the direction he came. I think I didn't see any other bucks, but he had sparred with another buck out in kind of that CRP field. There's sort of like this overgrown ditch, a big CRP field, maybe 20 acres, and then kind of onto ours. And I think that was the puzzle piece that locked in for me. And then I confirmed it. I talked to the neighbors, and I talked about this 1022 buck. I said, you guys know about this guy? Here's the encounter. I missed him. I'd like to get some intelligence. And they said, oh, yeah. We got photos of him. Never back in our property, though. We ran camera kind of close, and he's pointing to this ditch and kind of showing me where he's getting photos of this buck. And I'm like, that's it. This guy was in the most tiny little overlooked thing that, it's like a little unused, like 3 acres, that if you set foot in there or you did anything in there, or you like went and mowed the grass occasionally, it probably would have just blown it up. But those bucks had just found this little tiny thing, and it was right next to the road. I mean, we're talking like 50 yards off the road, not even probably.
Yeah.
But it just, I think no human generally ever went through there. And those guys didn't put it together. I can't hunt that piece, obviously, but it helped put a piece of the puzzle together that, okay, that's a bedroom, even though it's this odd little spot. And this is how those bucks move to kind of get into our agriculture stuff is bedding there and moving across. So that is an overlooked spot. Don't ask me how you'd hunt that little spot. You'd almost have to do a ground hunt. Like if that were a spot I'd be hunting. And again, kind of like Dan talked earlier, this guy is obviously not in the area anymore. Does another mature buck. I'd witnessed that one in the rut. He was a little bit smaller of a buck, but still mature. Use it. Is there another big one moving in there? Who knows? But I'll definitely pay attention to that in terms of travel and like new pieces of the puzzle. And I sure didn't tell the neighbors necessarily. Maybe they'll find out. Someone will watch this now and go, "Okay, I'm going to run in there," but it won't hurt me any. It's not a spot I can hunt, but just a good story, I think, on just like how crazy niche these little spots can be. I mean, I think most guys would never, that's the old farmyard, like we go down into the big woods to hunt, kind of thing. Like nobody's sitting up in little drainage where grandpa's old barn and house stood.
Yeah, it's actually surprising how many little pieces are like that out there. You were one of the spots that I hunt. There's something like that. It's just some remnants of a foundation. It's really overgrown, and every year there's a ton of buck sign right in this one spot. And again, I'm like, how can I get into this spot here without blowing it up and be able to hunt it? And it's just, I've also seen it too, where bucks will be bedded down behind old rundown barns that aren't being used anymore.
Yeah.
They get literally with their back up against a sort of. Dan, have you had any experiences like that?
All of them. I mean, I'd be looking at that ditch right off the bat first thing. That's my mindset. My mindset is to look at what is everybody missing. Where's the 10% that nobody's going to?
Sure.
So I would be looking at this stuff automatically, and I don't think other people do. But it's experiences like James had that make you start looking in that direction. But when you look, I mean, just look when we start talking deer stories and stuff. I talk about mine. Most of them are in spots where most people wouldn't hunt, and that's what it is finding that key spot. And a buck like that one didn't get to that age by bedding real remote or back in the woods where everybody would expect him to be. He would have died because that's where people hunt.
Yeah.
They find some little niche, and that's how they get by. Thinking about the story of that buck, we've talked to researchers and we've looked at collar research. 1 out of every 3 bucks relocates to a whole new area. And that's probably one of them. He just disappeared after that October. But it could be that he just moves to another spot that's far enough off the property that he doesn't come on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a possibility he's around. This is pretty, it's small parcels, so it's not like he's got like a big 300-acre parcel he can go to disappear into. My guess, I saw someone in the comments said maybe EHD got him. It's possible, I guess. We don't get much EHD in this area though, but it does happen. That's a possibility. My guess is some hunter probably connected with him, and not everyone puts that stuff out there either.
Yeah, that's true.
I was telling Dan before the show, as much as I'd love to hunt him again, if he showed up again, I would, obviously. But if someone was like, yeah, here's the other half of that story when we killed him, I'd be so happy and thrilled just to kind of get some closure on that one. And I picked one that I didn't get because I don't know about you guys, but my best hunts and tactical experiences, honestly, have been the ones that got away. Those are the ones that I keep me up at night, replaying it over and over, thinking about different strategies. I could have picked another buck off the wall that would have maybe been an interesting story, but I don't seem to. I mean, I learned from those too, but it's the ones I don't get that stick with me. They kind of haunt me. Like the few really big ones like this guy that I've either had an opportunity on or close encounter and I didn't get, and I don't get to chase anymore because someone else gets them or something. Those are honestly my most standout, big buck memories. It's sweet to close the deal on them, of course, but I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's like that for you, Dan, but I remember your old Don King one. That even for me, I didn't hunt your Don King buck, but it just seemed like that was like a standout buck for you that you didn't get.
Yeah, if I were to tell you the hunts that I'm the most passionate about, it's the ones that got away.
Yeah,
Um, like you said, I mean, it goes through your mind what you could have did different all the time. That giant buck in Iowa that was probably over 200 typical that I shot in the spine, dropped him, and then lowered my bow and he jumped up and ran off. Those hunts just replay over and over again. And honestly, the ones that I just go out there and get in a tree and kill the deer kind of just they don't mean as much to me. And it sounds bad, but you go to the taxidermist and the mediocre ones, let's say like the 130, 140 class bucks. Now remember, I got a pile of them on the wall,
yeah,
but I got to look at them and stare at them for a little bit and go, which buck is that? When did I shoot that buck?
yep,
But the ones that got away, I remember every detail.
yep,
And it really is. It's about the chase. It's not about the kill.
yep.
And it takes a while before a guy gets there. And I found it really, really cool and unique that you got this opportunity to showcase everything you've done so far. And really, for you took one of those spots and took one of the deer that got away.
Yeah, yeah. I I had a few deer that I had, in fact, one I was thinking about, and something you just said clicked with on that one. He's almost a 160, phenomenal 10 point with kickers, super heavy mass. It's not that my tactics. It was a mobile hunt, hang and hunt. I could have very easily picked that one. There wasn't much to the story. I mean, I did some scouting. It was one of those hunts that came together. It was cool. It's memorable, but it wasn't. I don't think like I didn't learn as much from that one. I guess it was like a reinforcing. It's like those kills like reinforces. Yep, this is
Right.
working. But it's like you said, Dan. It sometimes some of those like they just come together. They work out. Versus these ones that are like cat and mouse game, like this 10-22 buck, like several years of trying to put him together. And I do feel like I hunted him as best I could, given it was cool that I put together his bedroom, I think, after the fact, but I couldn't really hunt that bedroom anyway. Where I ended up getting the shot at him was feasibly the best location. I had kind of backtracked him to where he came onto our property, and that's exactly where I got the shot at him. I don't think I could have done a whole lot differently there, other than make the shot, obviously. But that one just stood out, and someone else may have had, he was a very old, mature buck, so someone else may have finally gotten to seal the deal on him. But yeah, those stand out. I've had a few of those in my hunting career where they just stick with me. I go back and still look at those trail camera photos 12 years later and 15 years later and think about, what I should have done and how I'd rehunt it. And yeah,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can remember.
Go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say I can remember a hunt where I was hunting a fairly large buck, and I had something on my mind going on at home with some turmoil crap that was going on with work and home and everything else. And I got down, I think it was like 5 or 6 minutes early, and busted that buck halfway down the tree, and coming in, and blew that spot, blew that opportunity, blew everything, and that just haunted me. And when I hear the story, what you're talking about, I think if you were prepared and concentrated right to the end,
yeah,
you probably had that buck pegged.
yep,
And that might be part of the reason it sticks in your head, because those hunts just drive me nuts. They stick in my head, and I'm not picking on you, because everybody, even me, obviously, makes those mistakes, and those mistakes are what put you back on track. Because I think we start getting loose when we start killing a lot of deer, killing them over and over and over again. You get looser and looser and looser. Then some traumatic thing happens, and you wound one or you blow one, and all of a sudden you tighten back up, right?
It's like a reset.
It's back to like my story on the belly crawling for the one. It's a great analogy. Like I was really tight on the approach there. You get loose over time. Like I don't need to belly crawl the last 50 yards to this. I can just walk it in
Yeah.
until you blow a big buck out of their bed. Then you got okay, maybe belly crawling wasn't such a bad idea.
Yeah, I absolutely applaud you for taking one of those spots right there and talking about a buck that got away. I've actually, if as we continue the series, I hope we get a little bit more of that because it's very relatable because we've all been there and done that. And as we're actually even seen in the comments here too, that's where I think we learn our most. Because it always sticks with you. That what if I would have done it like this? What if I would have done like, or simply recognizing what it was, that one thing that you did that didn't close out the deal. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. So hopefully maybe that buck is still around, or at least you get some closure on it. But either which way, it's a lesson learned, right?
Yeah, I got a feeling he's not.
Probably not.
But I guess stranger things have happened. He'd be pretty old if he showed back up again. But yeah, stranger things. But
What did you estimate him at in 23?
he had to be 5 or 6 there, where we had those trail camera photos. I mean, he was. I think hands down, I can say body wise, probably the biggest buck I've had an opportunity of hunting. I mean, it made his rack look small. In fact, like that tank body. He had a big rack, but yeah, there you see it. I mean, look at that buck by. I think this was a sequence. I wish I would have sent you a couple of the others. I think that was like a 2 or 3 year old buck behind him. You see in the corn there.
Oh, wow.
And it just dwarfed him. Anytime he'd come out with some of those other bucks that he'd be bachelored up with late summer like that, he just absolutely put him to shame and dwarfed him. I mean, it was
Yeah,
just,
I mean, for August to have like those the wrinkles and rolls already,
yeah.
still
One of the big
involved like that.
telltales for me, put that picture back once. One of the big telltales for me for a giant buck is when the front legs look like they're coming out of the middle of the deer.
Yeah,
When the chest and neck beyond the front leg, makes a deer actually look off balance, like the front legs are too far back.
yeah.
It always turns out to be just a giant of a buck weight wise and such. And that one's got that going on for sure.
Yeah.
Right. There's literally, it looks like there's chest extending beyond the front legs before the neck starts going up.
Yeah, that's August. Look at the size of the neck on that thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then, well, less than 30 days later, I mean, you don't get quite the perspective, but I mean, that's a pretty swollen neck there already for the end of September.
Yeah. This is the photo that I felt like he came. I think I was at a restaurant when I got this photo with my wife. And I'm like, well, he's still there after I missed him, but he's looking at me in the camera saying, see ya. That was it. I won.
And how often do we get that too, right? You know, especially nowadays with cell cameras. And you're like, you hemmed and hawed. Should I go out? Should I have gone out this morning? Should I have gone out today? Should I have gone out in the rain? All these things. And then the camera tells you what you should have done sometimes.
Yeah, I mentioned it to Dan again before. We were just catching up a little bit before the show. I think if you gotta go with adoption and technology. But if I had a choice, I'd love to go pre-Onyx, pre-cell cams, back to that. I preferred it. I mean, I use it. I use both those things now, but it definitely leveled the playing field, especially when it comes to public land. I think for guys, the cell cam thing is getting crazy.
Another thing.
Sorry, what was that, Dan?
I said Onyx is probably the thing that killed the most deer out of anything. I mean, it really gave people the balls to get back into spots, and it really showed you the land border so well. There were so many spots where it just looked like it wasn't public, but I knew what was public and what wasn't. Yeah. And I got spots all to myself and stuff right alongside the road and stuff. You don't have that no more. Everybody kind of knows where they can go on Onyx. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that killed a lot of deer.
Yeah, and the other thing it did, and I actually had a note because I wanted to mention this, Dan, is the one thing I noticed it did, maybe even, yeah, I guess the result is killing more deer, but it gave guys confidence to it. It took like the small percentage of us that had no problem walking out of a marsh 2 miles back with a compass at night. And now guys can just put all their faith in a phone and a map and walk out there with a lot more confidence. I mean, I took guys, 15 years ago before all that was around back in these marshes occasionally, and guys would think you're nuts. They're like, it's getting dark, man. We got to go. We can't get out of here after dark. Like, guys are freaking out. I remember AC Rider, this was back in the, like, probably Blood Bro days still, Dan, but we were hunting that same big marsh that I had that buck number one kill on.
Sure.
And must have been later because I was still at work, so it was probably 5, 6 p.m. And I get a call from Greg, and this is flip phone days. So he calls me on his flip phone. He's like, dude, can you pull up a map? I am totally lost in this marsh. And I had to navigate him by like, all right, well, what are you near? I'm by this big pond. I'm kind of in this general area. I'm like looking at the map, on like Google Earth at the time, I think it was. And I'm like, all right, I think you're kind of here. And I guided him kind of back to like safe land through a flip phone call. But now it's not a thing. As long as your battery's charged and you bring it back up, guys are just confident to walk out anywhere. I see that elk hunting too. Guys are buried in their phones elk hunting. It's nothing for anyone to go 5, 10 miles up in the mountains. It's just not a problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Elizabeth said just walk out with a compass.
I was just going to pull that up.
If you hunt some of this marsh country, you just can't walk out with a compass. You almost just have to be comfortable because like you just keep running. I remember that night he was running into pond after pond, and you start getting turned around when you kind of walk through cattails, and then you just hit open water. You're like, okay, which way? It can be tough, especially. I mean, these are miles and miles of just big marsh.
Oh yeah.
I mean, some of the ones down by you, Dan, are not even as big, and guys still get lost. Remember those guys getting lost in Jefferson Marsh?
It happens every year.
Yeah.
You kind of just it boggles my mind. I mean, it's a big marsh. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a few miles across, but even a few miles in such a busy area, you can see towers with lights on them. You can hear traffic.
Yeah.
No matter where you're at in there. Now, if you walk a straight line, you can hit a canal. You can hit stuff that like, oh, I can't get through this. But if you didn't go through it going out there, you're going the wrong way. So, I mean, it's kind of boggles my mind the way people get lost. But I think a lot of people just don't have woodsman skills. I think a lot of your hunters are city people that do this on a weekend or two a year, and that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm just checking here to see if we had any last questions here. Really appreciate you coming on here tonight, James, and sharing these 4 kills and 1 close one.
For sure. Really fun to come on and talk about it. I'll kind of watch. I saw guys on some of the other previous ones. Guys were commenting after the fact and asking some questions. So I'll keep an eye on
That would be
comments
great.
for any follow-ups there, and probably see guys on the Beast. I'm more of a forum Beast guy. I don't do the Facebook Beast quite as much, but kind of watch the forum posts. I'm a little old school that way. I enjoy the old forum method.
Very good. Dan, any final thoughts before we wrap up tonight's show?
It was a fun show. Fun catching up with you because I don't hear from you much anymore. We got to do this again after this series is done, and just talk tactics one of these days.
Yeah, maybe do get all your top 5 guys together and do like a round table or something.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Now you're talking. There you go. Well, from what it sounds like in the comment section, folks are wanting us to keep this series rolling here for a bit. So it might end up being a pretty big round table. So we'll see. But not a bad idea at all. But James, thanks again for taking the time tonight with all of us and telling us your stories and tactics and kind of breaking it all down for us and as the series goes. For everybody else, thanks again for tuning in. We got another episode coming up on Thursday here, Dan, don't we?
Yeah. It's going to be it's not going to be the same series. That's why it's on a Thursday.
Correct.
But we're going to bring on a Barry Behringer, a bear hunter. Talk to him about the new bear show he's got going on in Minnesota, and talk to him about bear hunting.
So there you go. You guys had a 2-for-1. Double trouble. Tuesday, Thursday, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. You get to see us again in 2 days. So until then, have fun. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.